They laughed. Not strangers, not acquaintances. My own parents. My mother covered her mouth like it was an inside joke she didn't want to ruin. My father just shook his head, the corners of his mouth twitching in mock pity. And then $10, he whispered it just loud enough for the whole conference room to hear. I sat there frozen. A room full of tailored suits and silk blouses, the scent of cologne and competition thick in the air. My face burned. My hands trembled under the mahogany table. The lawyer had just read my name. No pause. No explanation. To Dana Harper, $10. That was it? No sentimental artifact. No family heirloom. Just $10. I wasn't even surprised by the silence that followed, just by the smirks. The way my cousin leaned back with a knowing grin, the way Lucas, my older brother, didn't look at me at all, just tapped his phone, bored. And then Mr. Whitaker, our family's attorney for 3 decades, cleared his throat. Slowly, like he knew something no one else in the room did. Actually, he said, adjusting his glasses. They laughed. My own parents. My mother stifled hers behind a manicured hand as though she were trying not to ruin a perfectly timed punchline. My father didn't bother with subtlety. He leaned back in his chair and smirked. $10, he muttered loud enough for the room to catch. Guess that's what rebellion gets you. It was the kind of laugh that doesn't just humiliate you, it aims to erase you. I sat motionless, back straight, hands folded in my lap under the gleam of that absurdly polished conference table. I could feel the burn rising in my cheeks, but I didn't flinch, not in front of them. Mr. Whitaker, the estate lawyer, had just finished reading the part of the will that mattered to me. To Dana Harper, he'd said, without ceremony, I leave the sum of $10. That was it. No apology, no note. Just $10. A legal shrug, a final punctuation mark to a lifetime of being the family's afterthought. The room was filled with familiar faces. I barely recognized cousins, with jawlines sculpted by privilege, aunts still clinging to old pearls, and older grudges, in-laws scanning the crowd to see who was crying and who wasn't. The Harper family legacy soaked in wealth and dusted with contempt. I wasn't even surprised. Not really. If you've spent your entire life being overlooked, ignored, and belittled, there's not much left to expect. But still, something in me cracked. Not from the insult, but from their laughter. My parents didn't just dismiss me. They wanted the room to know they had dismissed me. That $10 inheritance wasn't a mistake. It was a message, and they made sure it landed. Lucas didn't laugh, but he didn't look at me either. He just tapped a rhythm on the table with his pen. My brother, the golden one, already knew the estate would be his. That antique gun collection, of course it went to him. My father's real estate holdings, naturally. My mother's diamond necklace passed down from Grandma. She wore it like a crown. Everything in this family had rules, even grief. As the whispers circled like vultures, I forced myself to stay still. If I so much as twitched, they'd win. They'd say I was too sensitive, overdramatic, ungrateful. I wanted to leave. Just walk out and never come back. But before I could push my chair back, Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat again. There is one more matter, he said. The room shifted. Quiet murmurs gave way to tension. Mr. Whitaker adjusted his glasses, his voice precise. There is a private addendum, addressed only to Dana. You could feel it how fast the temperature dropped. My mother's smile faltered. My father's brows pulled tight. For the first time in that suffocating room, I saw something I'd never seen in either of their eyes when looking at me, uncertainty. What do you mean, private? My father asked, his voice clipped. She already received her share? My mother added, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Mr. Whitaker didn't blink. Mr. Harper left a sealed envelope in my custody with explicit instructions that it be read by Dana and Dana alone. Silence. Heavy, biting silence. Then Mr. Whitaker turned to me. Would you follow me, please? I stood slowly. My legs felt hollow, but I moved with care, deliberate, unreadable. I didn't look at anyone. Let them wonder. As I walked out of the room, the air changed. Their eyes followed me like daggers, but they didn't know what they were aiming at. Not yet. The hallway to the private office was short-carpeted and strangely quiet. Mr. Whitaker opened the door and motioned me in. Inside, a single desk, a leather chair, and a cream-colored envelope resting in the center, like it had been waiting for me all along. It had my name on it, handwritten in a looping cursive I recognized instantly. My grandfather's. Mr. Whitaker nodded once. "Take all the time you need." Then he left the room. I approached the envelope with steady hands. It was sealed with red wax, a tiny symbol pressed into it. A camera. I let out a quiet breath. My grandfather hadn't just remembered me. He had something to say, something meant for no one else. They laughed too soon, and for the first time in years, I wasn't ashamed. I was curious. I was born into a family where legacy wasn't just a concept, it was a blueprint. The Harpers didn't build wealth. They engineered it, passed it down like a genetic code. My grandfather, Walter Harper, was the architect of it all. He turned a single metalwork shop into a multi-tiered empire and handed it to my parents like a coronation. From the outside, we were the picture of success. Polished homes in polished neighborhoods, silent dinners with full silverware settings. Even our Christmas wrapping paper had a color scheme, and it changed annually, voted on by committee. Inside that house image was everything, and I never fit the image. While my brother Lucas rehearsed for a future in corner offices and boardrooms, I disappeared into sketchbooks. While he practiced speaking at mock shareholder meetings, I hid in the attic painting shadows on cardboard. My mother once called my drawings sweet distractions. My father didn't acknowledge them at all. At 13, I bought my first camera with saved-up allowance and money from babysitting. It was a second-hand digital relic with dead pixels and a battery that barely held charge. But it was mine. On weekends, I'd sneak out before sunrise and photograph what the city left behind: cracked sidewalks, rusted fire escapes, faces in alleyways. I wasn't looking for beauty. I was trying to prove that something forgotten could still matter. One day, I showed my mother a photo I'd taken, a black and white, of an abandoned gas station swallowed by vines. I thought it was haunting. She thought I looked tired. "Maybe less time outside," she said, handing it back like a receipt she hadn't asked for. By high school, the lines had hardened. Lucas was the future. I was a phase. He had a mentor, a life plan, an executive wardrobe by senior year. I had journals, self-doubt, and unpaid art internships that no one in the family recognized as real work. I overheard them once after a board meeting. "She needs to wake up," my father had said. "She's still young," my mother offered, though. Even then she sounded unconvinced. "She'll fall in line eventually," but I didn't. I applied to art school in secret. Waited until the acceptance letter arrived before saying anything. At dinner, I laid it on the table like a quiet rebellion. "I'm moving to New York. I got into visual arts." My father blinked once. "You want to study photographs?" "That's not a profession, Dana. That's a hobby." Then my mother spoke, and her words etched into me deeper than any insult could. "You're wasting your inheritance." That was the last dinner we had together. 2 months later, I left. No trust fund, no applause, just a scholarship, a part-time barista job, and a used MacBook with half its keys missing. I rented a shared room in a fifth-floor walk-up with paper-thin walls and a view of a brick wall. I shot headshots for actors and promotional flyers for indie bands just to stay afloat. I edited photos on cafe Wi-Fi and slept between critiques and closing shifts. I wasn't chasing stardom. I was chasing something no one in my family had ever given me: validation on my own terms. But through all of that, there was one person who never asked me to justify myself: my grandfather. Walter Harper wasn't warm, not in the traditional sense, but he was consistent. Whenever I saw him, usually brief, polite encounters at family functions, he'd ask the same question: "You still taking pictures?" And he'd smile. Just a flicker, but it was real. The kind of smile that doesn't need to say much to mean everything. 3 weeks before he passed, I found myself standing in front of his brownstone. I had just wrapped up a shoot in the city, nothing glamorous, just portraits for a grassroots non-profit, and something pulled me there. We weren't the type of family that did surprise visits, but I rang the bell anyway. To my shock, he answered the door himself, thinner than I remembered, slower, but his eyes sharp as ever. "Well," he said with a smirk, "a Harper who actually knocks. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't have to. His home smelled like cedar and old ink. Every book was in its place. We sat in his study surrounded by oil portraits of ancestors I never cared to ask about. "What are you working on?" he asked, pouring tea from a silver pot. I hesitated, then told him about my new series, Invisible Homes, photographs of abandoned buildings, places being razed for luxury developments, quiet ruins no one saw anymore. "What are you trying to say with them?" he asked. I looked down at my hands. "That people matter," I said, "even if the world forgets them." He nodded slowly. "That's dangerous work." I blinked. "Why?" "Because telling the truth costs more than people think." We didn't speak for a long while after that, just the tick of the grandfather clock and the crackle of city air against old windows. As I got up to leave, he followed me to the door. Then without warning, he opened a drawer near the foyer and pulled out something small, a battered film camera, older than me, corners chipped, leather strap faded. "This was mine," he said, placing it gently into my hands. "Before I built the company, I carried this everywhere." I stared at him, stunned. "I didn't know you took photos." He didn't answer right away, just looked out the window. "I stopped," he said. "Some dreams don't survive the weight of inheritance." Then he looked at me, really looked. "Don't let them take your eye, Dana. That's your gift, and your rebellion." That was the last thing he ever said to me. I didn't know what he meant by them. I thought he was warning me about the business. I didn't realize until the envelope showed up at that will reading that he was warning me about the family. The law office looked like it belonged in a magazine, floor-to-ceiling, glass-imported marble floors, and light fixtures designed to whisper power. Midtown's coldest architecture was always the backdrop for Harper business. Even our grief had to show up in pressed suits and polished shoes. I wore my best black dress, the one I rotated between gallery openings and funerals. I'd even straightened my hair, a final concession to decorum. I knew what my mother would say if I didn't unpolished. That was her favorite word for me. When I walked into the conference room, the temperature dropped. My parents were already seated, my father at the head of the table, like it was a board meeting, my mother beside him, spine like steel. Lucas was scrolling his phone, playing the part of the disinterested heir. I didn't speak. I simply nodded and sat at the far end where they wouldn't have to pretend to acknowledge me. More chairs filled. Cousins, distant relatives, in-laws. The usual scavengers who only showed up when property and portfolios were being divided. The scent of cologne, leather, and entitlement saturated the air. I counted 3 Rolexes before Mr. Whitaker even walked in. At precisely 10 a.m., he entered carrying a folder so thick it looked like it might contain the entire Harper family history. He didn't smile. He never did. Mr. Whitaker was the kind of man who treated estate law like sacred scripture. "Thank you all for coming," he said, taking his seat. "We're here to execute the last will and testament of Walter H. Harper." He began with the expected. Aunt Lydia got the Vermont house. Naturally, she cried the loudest at the memorial. A string of cousins received stock distributions. One of them fist-bumped another under the table. Lucas predictably inherited our grandfather's antique gun collection. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd never even handled a firearm. My mother received a necklace my grandmother's set in vintage platinum and perfectly suited to the woman who spent her life performing legacy. My father got a bundle of real estate holdings and a sealed, handwritten letter. His expression didn't change, but he gripped the envelope like it owed him something. And then silence. Whitaker looked at me. "To Dana Harper," he said. A pause. "Walter leaves the sum of $10. The room didn't erupt, it curdled. First the silence, then the scoffs, and finally the laughter. Quiet at first, then louder. Lucas let out a quiet chuckle. A cousin leaned in and muttered, "Guess photography doesn't pay?" My mother laughed. My father shook his head. I sat perfectly still. Not from shock, but discipline. If I gave them a reaction, they'd take it as confirmation that I was small, that I cared more about their perception than my own footing. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I said one word, understood. But inside, something hollowed. It wasn't the money. I never expected any. It was the message, the optics, the cruelty of making a spectacle out of my exclusion. That's what stung the laughter. The confirmation that to them I had always been a footnote. I nearly stood up to leave. But then Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. "There is one more item," he said. The room snapped silent. The change was immediate, like someone had drawn a line across the floor. Whitaker turned to me this time with the slightest shift in tone. "There is a private addendum," he said carefully, "meant only for Dana." The silence this time was thunderous. "What do you mean, private?" my father demanded. "She already got what she was due," my mother said coldly. Whitaker remained still. "Mr. Harper left a sealed envelope in my custody, along with specific instructions. It is to be delivered to Dana in private and no one else." The shift was visible. My mother's jaw clenched. My father narrowed his eyes. Lucas frowned, confused, not suspicious, just unprepared. I rose slowly. Didn't speak. Didn't look at anyone. My heels clicked against the marble as I followed Whitaker down a narrow hallway. It was the first time in that building I felt taller than the room. The adjoining office was cool and still. A single desk, a closed door, a cream envelope resting like a relic, my name written in soft cursive across the front. I didn't need to see the signature. I knew. Mr. Whitaker gestured to the envelope. "For you," he said, then paused. "I haven't read it, per his request. Take your time." He closed the door behind him. I sat, ran my fingers over the wax seal, a small camera imprint, subtle, elegant. I let out a long, steady breath and cracked it open. Inside, several handwritten pages, all in that familiar slanted script. The first line stopped me cold. "My dearest Dana." He started with an apology for the $10 insult, said he knew it would hurt, that it was meant to, because he needed them to show me who they really were, when they thought I had nothing. Line by line, he peeled back a truth, so sharp it changed the shape of the air in the room. The $10 was a smokescreen. He had bypassed the public will entirely for me. The Harper Creative Trust, a philanthropic holding company quietly gathering assets for over a decade, was now under my control. Not Lucas's, not the board's, mine. Alongside it, a private gallery, a penthouse studio, a full executive infrastructure already in place. I was the sole beneficiary. Then came the sentence that stayed burned into my spine. They laughed. Dana, but they laughed too soon. I read the letter 3 times. The pages didn't change. The ink didn't disappear. But part of me still didn't believe it. Everything I had been denied in public reputation legacy value had been handed to me in private. Not as an apology, not as compensation, as intention. My grandfather hadn't just left me money. He'd built an entirely separate future behind closed doors, crafted for me in secret, while everyone else played by the rules of the Harper game. Attached to the letter were notarized documents, ownership transfers, and financial summaries. But that wasn't what stunned me. It was the clarity. He didn't ask me to become something I wasn't. He didn't hand me a title and expect me to perform it. He left me what he called a foundation, not a fortress. The Harper Creative Trust wasn't just valuable, it was vision, a living, breathing entity built to support original, unfiltered creativity, the polar opposite of everything the Harper boardroom worshipped, and it was mine. There were no strings, just one request: use your eye, not theirs. I placed the letter down and saw tucked beneath it a small black box, inside a single brass key on a worn leather cord, and beneath the key a handwritten note. Beacon Street, top floor, your studio. your real inheritance. It took me a few moments to breathe. When I finally stood and opened the door, I was met with the waiting room's sterile quiet. The others were still in the conference room, laughing, moving on. Unaware that everything had already changed, I walked past them without a word. Lucas caught my eye. "Everything okay?" he asked, not with concern, just curiosity. "Just needed a moment," I replied. Then I left. I didn't respond to the texts that followed. The passive-aggressive message from my mother, the winking emoji from Lucas captioned with a Forbes article about earning your seat at the table. Let them assume. While they gossiped, I met with Mr. Whitaker privately. We began executing the transfer quietly, methodically. No press, no announcements, just silent redirection. Then I visited Beacon Street. The penthouse was unlike anything I'd imagined. It wasn't opulent, it was intentional. Hardwood floors, matte black fixtures, floor-to-ceiling windows that filtered golden hour light like a lens. In the center of the room stood a long steel table. Atop it, a leather-bound folder labeled Archive. Inside were my photographs, from gallery shows, student exhibits, even random shoots I thought no one cared about. Frame tag dated. Some I had sold for pennies just to afford groceries. Others I assumed were lost forever. He had bought them, all of them, under aliases, collected, protected, preserved. I ran my fingers over each frame in silence. I couldn't cry, not because I didn't feel it, but because it demanded something deeper than tears. He hadn't judged me. He had witnessed me. And now I stood in the space he built, not for the perfect air, but for the right one. A brass plaque near the entrance read, Harper Light Studio. It was his dream resurrected in my hands. I didn't sleep that night. I stood at the window with the city pulsing below, that key still hanging around my neck. I thought of every critique, every time I was told my art was a hobby, every polite dismissal, every cruel laugh. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. Over the next few weeks, I worked, strategized, built quietly. No announcements, no family dinners, no public parades. I didn't need to tell them, not yet. Let them laugh a little longer. The real move hadn't even started. 6 weeks later, the invitations went out. Minimalist, embossed, stark white envelopes sealed in wax, no frills, no family crest, just a single line in silver print. Harper Light Studio presents The Inheritance of Vision, a debut gallery event. One night only, invitation only. To the outside world, it was a new gallery's first show. To me, it was the culmination of everything they said I wasn't capable of. And to my family, it was bait, perfectly sharpened. Lucas RSVP'd immediately. Of course he did. He couldn't resist a photo op. My mother sent a cryptic, "We'll see," which meant yes. My father didn't respond, but I heard through Lucas that they'd planned to attend. Curiosity, ego control. It didn't matter. Opening night arrived. The gallery glowed. Floor-to-ceiling prints lined the walls. Not just my best work, my whole journey. Early raw experiments, gritty street portraits, evocative shots of shadows slipping through broken spaces, all curated with precision. The story wasn't just in the images, it was in the sequence. Every piece said the same thing: I was never invisible. You just weren't looking. The final room was different, darker, lit with intention. In the center, a single display on a raised plinth encased in glass. A crisp $10 check framed like a priceless artifact. Next to it, a silver placard, gifted to Dana Harper at the reading of Walter H. Harper's will. Estimated value priceless. Sometimes the smallest inheritance is the greatest test. I didn't need to explain it. The check had become art, and art told the truth better than any speech. At precisely 7:42 p.m. they arrived. Lucas first smiling, already working the room. My mother followed, wrapped in pearls and the same practiced graciousness she wore to fundraisers. My father walked behind them, surveying the space like he was appraising it. They didn't recognize the space, and they certainly didn't expect the crowd. Critics, donors, journalists, curators. The Harper name was still powerful, but tonight it wasn't theirs. Lucas reached me first. His eyes scanned the walls. "This is all you?" he asked, confusion creeping in. I nodded once. "Every shot." He blinked. "Since when do you run this place?" "Since always," I said. My mother approached. "Dana." She said, that clipped smile frozen on her lips. "This is quite ambitious. Did someone sponsor this?" "No sponsors," I replied calmly. "Just one believer." My father didn't speak. He was busy trying to spot the weak seams, the cracks in the illusion. He didn't find any. Before they could press further, Mr. Whitaker appeared beside me, dressed impeccably, holding a champagne flute. Calm. "Shall we?" he asked. I nodded. We stepped onto a small platform at the edge of the room. The lights dimmed slightly. Cameras turned. Conversation softened. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Whitaker began, thank you for joining us this evening at Harper Light Studio, founded by and dedicated to the artistic vision of Dana Harper." A ripple passed through the room. Tonight you've seen a collection that reflects not only the evolution of an artist, but the continuation of a legacy that was never about numbers but vision. And then it's also time we reveal something many of you have not yet heard. As executor of Walter Harper's private estate, I'm honored to share that Dana Harper is not only the founder of this studio, but the sole beneficiary of the Harper Creative Trust. There it was. Gasps. Audible. Heads turned. My mother's expression froze mid-smile. My father's jaw clenched. Lucas blinked like the words hadn't registered. Whitaker continued. Mr. Harper believed legacy should follow merit, not entitlement. Dana's unwavering pursuit of truth in art, despite resistance, earned his full trust, his admiration, and his inheritance. He raised his glass. To Dana Harper, the true heir. Applause followed, loud, earnest, some from guests, some from strangers. But I wasn't listening to them. I was watching my family. My mother's lips parted, but no words came. My father took half a step forward, then stopped like the floor had shifted beneath him. Lucas just stared. I stepped down and walked toward them slowly. Not triumphant, controlled. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother whispered. "Because you never asked," I replied. "You never asked what I was building. You only asked why I wasn't like you. We're still your family," she said, grasping. "And yet you laughed when I was humiliated," I said softly. "That check. You thought it measured my worth." This, I gestured to the gallery, this was the real measure. My father's voice cut in. This was some kind of setup. "No," I said. "It was a mirror. You just didn't like what it showed." They didn't answer. Because what was left to say, I left them there staring at a world they'd never tried to understand. I returned to the crowd, to people who saw me not as a black sheep, but as a creator, a force. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had claimed something. I felt like I had always owned it. I didn't go home that night. I stayed at the penthouse, my penthouse on Beacon Street. The gallery had emptied hours earlier. The champagne had gone flat. The buzz faded into the quiet hum of the city. I stood barefoot in the center of the studio, surrounded by my work, the remnants of the night's applause still echoing in my bones. On the desk, the $10 check sat beside a framed photo of my grandfather. He was staring out the window of a train light, falling across the lines of his face. I'd taken it years ago, back when I was invisible to everyone but him. It wasn't just a photograph anymore. It was a vow. He hadn't left me wealth to rescue me. He left it to liberate me. The next morning, I made a decision. The Harper Light Studio wouldn't just be a monument to my survival, it would be a launch pad. I finalized the plan that had started forming the moment I saw the archive. We converted the lower floors into live workspaces for young artists, those who, like me, had been dismissed, overlooked, or told their vision wasn't viable. We brought in equipment, set up darkrooms, podcast studios, critique walls. No formal applications, just portfolios, hunger, grit. The first residency opened with 6 artists. They arrived shy, uncertain, the way I had once been. But when they stepped into those rooms, their backs straightened. They saw something no one had ever shown them belief. I established a grant program through the Harper Creative Trust, quietly, efficiently. We funded underserved visual storytellers focusing on artists of color, queer artists, those who couldn't afford a path through the old gates. At the first board meeting, I wore black jeans, ankle boots, and a simple white t-shirt. The other trustees blinked. One asked if I'd gotten the dress code wrong. I opened my presentation. A 3-year plan balancing philanthropy and sustainable growth, a portfolio with better ROI projections than any legacy project still clinging to the Harper name. By the time I finished, no one mentioned my outfit again. I didn't return my parents' calls, not out of spite, just clarity. Some relationships are roots, others are weights, and some legacies are loud, but the ones that matter are lived. Months passed. The studio flourished. Exhibits rotated monthly. Artists in residence published books, sold out shows, created platforms that reached far beyond what I had ever imagined for myself at their age. Lucas never came back. My mother didn't reach out. My father remained silent. And that was fine. I wasn't building for them. I was building in spite of them. One afternoon, a soft knock came at my office door. A girl, maybe 19, stood there, nervous, hopeful. Her hands gripped an old Nikon like it was a lifeline. "Do you ever worry," she asked, "that people will only see your money and not your work?" I smiled. "All the time," I said, "but it only matters if I believe them. Lead with your eye. The rest follows." She nodded slowly, filed it away. I recognized the look. I had carried it once too. On the 1-year anniversary of my grandfather's passing, Mr. Whitaker delivered one last letter. It was short, no ceremony, just a folded note still written in his hand. "Wealth is not what you hold. It's what you build. You were always the legacy I believed in, Dana. You just had to believe it too." That night I unlocked the gallery after hours. I lit a single candle beneath the framed $10 check. A few strangers wandered in, tourists, students, late-night stumblers. They stood quietly in front of the check, reading the plaque, whispering theories, asking each other what the story behind it might be. They didn't know the whole truth. They didn't need to. My legacy didn't need validation. It was framed in light and silence, in vision and defiance. It didn't need to be explained. It just needed to be lived. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have supported you? Drop your story in the comments. And if you believe legacy is something you define, not inherit, like subscribe, and stay tuned for more.